honey?
Big Bird, chase! Big Bird, chase!
What does he say?
What? Big Bird, chase me!
With his boyish charm and jovial spirit, John Candy was just plain fun to watch. In a career that spanned 2 decades and 40 feature films, Candy perfected the role of the bumbling guy next door, a regular Joe who just happened to be a movie star.
The entire country fell in love with John Candy. He could not go anywhere without being mobbed.
Oh, really?
But John Candy was never comfortable with his fame or his massive size.
A personal decision on my part was to never intervene in his weight, in his size. I felt ultimately that was something he had to deal with.
And despite the best of intentions, Candy could not control his self-destructive desires.
He had these Herculean appetites for things. He smoked like a chimney. He loved to party. Almost everything to excess.
John lived for the day that he was in. And he seemed to be having the most fun.
I just remember, nights of music and fun and laughter that were unparalleled.
In the next hour, we'll follow the trail of a Canadian original, from John's uncertain debut in Toronto to his heady days on SCTV.
Tonight's program is about a man who felt very uncomfortable with his mother.
Then came Candy's big splash on the big screen.
Tom Hanks was kind of in awe of John Candy. He was a big SCTV fan and just had so much respect for John.
Along the way, John Candy made a horrible business decision.
It was financially a disaster, no question about it.
Teetered on the brink of disaster.
You could tell he was in pain.
And finally went over the edge.
John was incredibly overweight, and he was smoking a lot, and he didn't seem happy.
This is the story of a comic genius who lived life with gusto, made millions of people laugh, and died way too soon. This is the story of John Candy, the true Hollywood story.
Her life's ambition was to be a star.
Never recovered from the public scandal.
Just past midnight on March 4th, 1994, John Candy turned in after a productive day on the set of Wagons East, a comedy shot on location in Mexico. The gentle giant of film clicked off the light and went to sleep. Sometime during the night, John suffered a massive heart attack. He never woke up. The reaction was first disbelief, then shock, in Hollywood and in Candy's hometown in Canada. John Franklin Candy was born on Halloween night, 1950, in Newmarket, Ontario, 20 miles north of Toronto. As a child, young John was a natural performer, always eager to please.
I played a lot, I had a great imagination as a kid. We were always playing pretend games and putting little stage shows on in garages or in someone's basement.
But the world of make-believe was shattered when John's father, Sidney, died of a heart attack at the age of 35. The tragedy completely traumatized 5-year-old John. Journalist Martin Nellman.
No one really ever explained it to him or dealt with the fact of what he was going through. And and he was brought up in a household of, aunts and grandparents.
As a teenager, Candy attended Neil McNeil High in Toronto. The Catholic prep school's newest student was 6 feet 2 inches tall, but he was chunky and extremely self-conscious. Friend Jonathan O'Mara.
His weight was of constant concern to him. He had difficulty with girls. The relationships didn't seem to last very long, and it may have been because he wouldn't let them get any closer to him for fear of them rejecting him.
John immersed himself in school activities. He became class treasurer and anchored the offensive line on the gridiron.
He loved football. He lived, breathed, and ate, slept football. He was so good. Virtually nobody could get past him.
Candy played hard and partied harder.
John was constantly smoking. wherever he could get one. And he liked to travel to Buffalo's because if the drinking age was 18, John could drink copious amounts compared to other people.
In 1967, a serious knee injury ended John's high school football career. Devastated, the versatile 17-year-old decided to take a stab at acting.
John had a drama teacher in Neil McNeil High School named Ernest Brown, and he took to John instantly, as many people did, because John was such an affable kind of a guy. And he encouraged him in his drama pursuits.
Candy appeared in several student productions and performed well, but he was a mediocre student with a cynical outlook on the future.
He was very fatalistic about his life at that point. I really got the feeling that he thought he was living on borrowed time. Like he had a time bomb ticking in there because his dad had gone at 35.
In early 1970, however, 19-year-old Candy hooked up with a Toronto talent agent and over the next 2 years appeared in several TV commercials. Then, within a few months, John met two people who changed his life. A 23-year-old art student named Rosemary Hober and a wisecracking 21-year-old comedian from Ottawa. His name was Dan Aykroyd.
I remember he wore this brown suit with a brown tie and a brown shirt and brown shoes. And he drove a brown Pontiac, and he was like sort of Mr. Fade into the wall, not to be noticed.
John began dating Rosemary Hober, and he became close friends with Aykroyd and fellow comic Valerie Bromfield.
When they heard that Second City, which was a legendary comedy troupe in Chicago, was coming to Toronto and wanted to set up in Toronto, was auditioning people, and Valerie and Dan were going down to audition, then they wanted John to audition, and he was too nervous and too scared to do it.
In a radio interview years later, Candy described what happened next.
They said, well, coming down to me is for lunch, and, you know, we can hang out and you can see some of the people. And I thought, well, that'd be cool. So I went down there, and I was waiting for them, and my name got called to go in, and I was so upset. They're pushing me in the door, and I ended up on stage.
Candy put on quite a show as a gay boxer. Second City founder Bernie Salins.
I thought it was terrific, and we had already filled the spot. In fact, it was sort of a last-minute, dutiful audition. He was a very funny man. He had something else which I think many good comedians, especially people who become very successful, have. He was vulnerable, and he showed his vulnerability.
Candy was hired on the spot, and after a brief apprenticeship in Chicago, the 23-year-old returned to Toronto in December 1973 to join the new Second City Theatre and a cast poised for greatness. Coming up,
there would be some wild nights, long, hard nights of just going from one place to the next, having some drinks here, having some drinks there, and you had to keep up with Joe.
In late 1973, John Candy teamed up with Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner, Eugene Levy, and Andrea Martin at the new Second City Theatre in Toronto. The show became the hottest ticket in town, and 23-year-old Candy was having the time of his life.
He had these Herculean appetites for things. He smoked like a chimney. He loved to party, almost everything to excess.
The talented young Canadian comics seemed destined for stardom. In 1975, Gilda Radner and Dan Aykroyd left for New York City to join a groundbreaking new TV series called Saturday Night Live. John Candy didn't make the cut, but Second City founder Bernie Salins and his partner Andrew Alexander feared the loss of more homegrown talent. By the summer of 1976, they had enough.
In order to hang on to their people in both Toronto and Chicago, they were going to have to offer them some kind of television exposure.
Salins and Alexander developed SCTV, short for Second City Television, a half-hour comedy show scheduled to air on Canada's global TV network. A gifted cast was assembled from north and south of the border. 26-year-old John Candy topped the list. SCTV writer Paul Flaherty.
John was already making movies when we started doing SCTV, and he was always kind of like, in terms of fame and money, a few steps ahead of everybody else.
Eugene Levy, Andrea Martin, Harold Ramis, Catherine O'Hara, and Paul's brother Joe Flaherty rounded out the cast. SCTV was a wicked spoof of television, using a station in fictional Mellonville, Canada as a backdrop. The show debuted in the fall of 1976 and quickly won critical acclaim.
This was so innovative and so funny, and it was a brilliant satire of television.
Candy's specialty was dead-on impersonations of the big men of showbiz, including Orson Welles, Jackie Gleason, and Alfred Hitchcock.
I can usually do them better than most people who have no idea what it's like to be fat anyway, which I always hated. You know, I think when you're fat, you are treated as some kind of freak by the public.
Candy also created a series of recurring characters, a creepy late-night horror movie host named Dr. Tongue, the polka-loving Yash Schmengi, and chain-smoking, bad-tempered celebrity Johnny LaRue.
Johnny LaRue was like a sort of chubby Hugh Hefner hedonist. He just reveled in bimbos and rich food and, drinking himself under the table.
Hard drinking was Candy's vice, both in and out of character.
There would be some wild nights, long, hard nights of just going from one place to the next, having some drinks here, having some drinks there, and he had to keep up with John. He had tremendous energy, tremendous appetites. He just was a big guy who took in a lot.
Still, Candy's boisterous personality made him a standout on the show.
He was a good improviser, very good on stage, very kind of charismatic. The audience tended to look at John if he was in a scene, simply because, he's that big, imposing presence.
Candy was primed to become a big star, and his chance came in the spring of 1978, when John was approached by Hollywood's hottest director, 32-year-old Steven Spielberg. Spielberg offered Candy a small role in his new comedy 1941, starring fellow Second City alums Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. Candy left SCTV and spent the next 6 months on the set. Then, in April 1979, Candy married Rosemary Hober at St. Basil's Church in Toronto. The ceremony capped a 6-year courtship. John was 28. Rosemary was 29.
Totally unlike what I expected from a wife of John. She was calm. She was tolerant. She was affectionate. She was terrific. She was his anchor.
John's career also got a boost. He appeared once again with Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi in the slapstick musical comedy, The Blues Brothers.
Belushi respected people with talent, with real talent. And he saw that Candy, as an actor, was talented. As an impressionist, he was talented. As a comedian, he was talented. As a vocalist, as a mime. He had that all-round appeal.
Who wants an orange whip? Orange whip? Orange whip? 3 orange whips.
The Blues Brothers wrapped production in July 1979. 2 months later, 1941 was released to lukewarm reviews. But Candy was already on to his next film. Stripes starred John's old pal and another Second City alum, Bill Murray. Early in the shoot, however, Candy's childhood insecurities began to surface. SCTV director George Bloomfield.
John had spent the afternoon doing the mud wrestling scene in there, and he called. It was really quite out of the blue. He was like very, very unhappy, and he felt he had been totally humiliated, and he felt really bad. I think the idea of being in a mud wrestling and being semi-naked for it, I think really kind of embarrassed him.
John finished the shoot without incident. He retreated to his rental home in L.A. Meanwhile, in the spring of 1980, The Blues Brothers was released. The movie was a hit, and so was John Candy. Friend Bob Crane.
It was gigantic. I think for John to be in that film was a real career plus for John. I think did maybe put him up a notch, and maybe some people did notice him for the first time.
Coming up.
Physically, it takes a toll. It takes you really pound your body about. And I've abused mine over the past few years, God knows.
In the spring of 1980, John Candy made the most of a small role in a big film as a harried parole officer who chases the Blues Brothers all over the state of Illinois. But 30-year-old Candy was poised for a much bigger splash.
The phones began to ring. A lot of Hollywood agents were interested in John.
Despite a promising future in feature films, John Candy felt an itch to return to the small screen. In the 3 years since John left SCTV, the show finished its run on Canadian television. In 1981, NBC bought the rights to the series. Candy wanted in, and SCTV execs wanted Candy. John's attorney, Claire Burrell.
John had been hot, and when SCTV got picked up to replace the Midnight Special for very late night 90-minute television, John was considered to be one of the most important people in that cast.
In the fall of 1981, SCTV ran on Friday evenings following The Tonight Show. 31-year-old Candy doubled as writer and performer, but the long format proved difficult, and the sketches became endless stretches. SCTV cast member Martin Short.
It was an insane amount of material, and you just worked all the time.
John tried to keep pace with the grueling schedule, but he managed to find time for some film work. A tiny part in the tongue-in-cheek comedy National Lampoon's Vacation. The movie starred former SNL cast member Chevy Chase. The role was a pivotal point in Candy's career.
It was a big feather in his cap. It was a major studio. It was a major film. He's very, very familiar with Chevy Chase.
Candy and screenwriter John Hughes worked together for the first time. It wasn't the last. Meanwhile, in September 1982, Candy and his fellow SCTV cast members were honored with an Emmy Award for Best Comedy Variety Writing. John Candy was on fire.
It was obvious that he was one of the people, one of the standouts on that show. And the phones began to ring. A lot of Hollywood agents were interested in John.
John returned for a second season on SCTV, but ratings were low. And in the spring of 1983, NBC execs gave the show the axe. 32-year-old Candy didn't miss a beat. He jumped back to the big screen in Splash, playing the wisecracking older brother of Tom Hanks. Ron Howard directed the film.
When the two of them just completely clicked, and their scenes just flowed. He and Hanks had a really loose quality that I thought kind of elevated all their scenes.
Candy loved to party almost as much as he loved to act. On one occasion, his antics even held up production.
He kind of rolls out of the car just completely wiped out. He says, "Oh, Ron, I'm so sorry. I'm just beat. I never even got to bed, man. I mean, you know what happened? I bumped into Nicholson." And he said, "You don't need to go to bed. Come on, let's go."
Still, Candy nearly stole the picture. But his portrayal of Hank's hedonistic brother was painfully close to reality.
He was overweight, and he was smoking a lot. I mean, he just had so much energy that he was just going nonstop.
In fact, by June 1983, 6'2" Candy tipped the scales at 300 pounds. Friend Bob Crane.
It was almost a thing where you didn't have to say anything. It could be a look, or he would make a reference to himself. And you just kind of sit there and feel badly for him.
The news was better on the career front. National Lampoon's Vacation became the surprise summer hit of 1983. But Candy was trapped in a private hell. He ate, drank, and smoked to extremes. John needed help, he checked into the Pritikin Weight Loss Center in Santa Monica, California. However, Candy was unable to stick with the rigorous diet.
Well, I'm trying to maintain this Pritikin program that I followed last year, and I put on about 20 pounds again, and it's like I slipped, you know?
John's weight climbed again, but so did his star. Thanks to the 1984 release of Splash, the film was a runaway hit. Journalist Martin Nelman.
It's been obvious for a long time that John Candy's a really talented, funny guy from anyone who watched on TV. This is the first time that a movie has been able to turn him loose and let him do what he can do.
Candy had even more to celebrate. That same year, his first child, Jennifer, was born. Candy's success with Splash raised his stock in Hollywood. In the spring of 1985, veteran comedy writer Carl Reiner cast John in his first leading role. The film was Summer Rental.
John was a perfect piece of casting because there's always a Cary Grant and a fat man trying to get out. I think that was the case of John.
Summer Rental was a modest hit, but John's three other 1985 movies, Brewster's Millions, Follow the Bird, and Volunteers, all bombed at the box office. Suddenly, Candy's booming career seemed to be stalled. Coming up, Candy rules.
The entire country fell in love with John Candy. He could not go anywhere without being mobbed.
By the early 80s, the film career of John Candy was stuck on busy. Critics were sweet on Candy, but most of his movies were stinkers.
He made picture after picture after picture, which took him away from his family and which endangered his health. And he just couldn't help himself. He just could not say no.
In the spring of 1986, 35-year-old John Candy received a call from writer-director John Hughes. Hughes was casting for his latest film, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
I mean, it was a comedy, but it was a heart-wrenching movie for me, and, I never looked at it like he was a buffoon Del was a real character to me.
Del was Del Griffith, a talkative shower curtain ring salesman who locks horns with an uptight executive played by Steve Martin. Bill Brown was an assistant producer on the film.
And those two guys were perfect for it, and they brought so much to it, and there was all this incredible, ad-libbing and things that, were like just an eighth of a page in the script that turned into these amazing scenes.
In September 1987, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles opened to rave reviews and sold out theaters.
The entire country fell in love with John Candy. And after this movie, he could not go anywhere without being mobbed.
But despite his on-screen persona as the court jester, John Candy shunned the spotlight.
On the one hand, he loved it and craved it because it was a gauge of appreciation of who he was and what his work was. On the other hand, he didn't like being recognized.
Meanwhile, 37-year-old Candy kicked around future collaborations with John Hughes.
John started to tailor-make films that were specifically, made for John Candy. He fully understood the comedic potential of this guy and then crafted a movie that was perfect for him.
The film was called The Great Outdoors, a comedy about two antagonistic brothers-in-law who vacation together at a woodsy resort. In September 1987, Candy joined his friend and co-star Dan Aykroyd on location in Bass Lake, California.
This was a piece of material that was, to us, really, it struck home because it was the definitive cottage country movie, and John and I both used to have summer places that we would go to, and so when we saw this script, we said, oh yeah, we've got to be a part of this.
4 months later, Candy was in Chicago filming the comedy Uncle Buck with an unknown child actor named Macaulay Culkin.
It was the first sort of breakout movie for Mac, and the two of them working together was really, really special.
In February 1988, Hughes coaxed Candy back to L.A. for a cameo role in Home Alone, which also featured 7-year-old Culkin. John was even offered a tiny percentage of the movie's profits. Candy graciously declined, saying he would do the cameo as a favor.
And that was the kind of relationship that the two Johns had, was that, you know, they just wanted to work together, and John Candy would sort of show up for whatever.
Candy missed out on a small fortune. Home Alone went on to gross a staggering $270 million at the box office. In the summer of 1988, The Great Outdoors was released nationwide. The film bombed, but the big paychecks kept coming, and John loved to live high on the hog.
My nickname for John was Johnny Deluxe, because everything had to be big with John. Everything had to be first class.
If he went to dinner, he had to pick up the tab. He always had the biggest apartment. He always seemed to have more money than anyone. Even if he didn't have any more money than anyone, he seemed to have more money than anyone. John lived for the day that he was in. And he seemed to be having the most fun.
Coming up, Candy switches gears.
You could tell he was nervous about it. You could tell that it wasn't his comfort zone.
As the 1980s drew to a close, John Candy commanded 7-figure paychecks per picture, but the talented import from Canada struggled with his self-esteem, an expanding waistline, and a hit-and-miss film career.
He always craved respect and kind of tortured him.
John Candy lived in Southern California, but he never strayed far from his northern roots. Friend John Langley.
John was a hockey fanatic. I mean, anything to do with hockey, he loved, loved, loved.
And like most hockey fans, John was in awe of the great one, Wayne Gretzky. In the summer of 1988, an entire nation mourned when number 99 was traded from Edmonton to Los Angeles. On October 6, 1988, the most prolific scorer in the sport made his first appearance as an LA King. 37-year-old John Candy was there. John was anxious to meet Gretzky, and flamboyant team owner Bruce McNall could make that happen.
Bruce McNall was a very high-living guy who everybody thought was like the Wizard of Oz, could do no wrong. He brought Gretzky to LA, he was involved in movies, he owned racehorses, he owned planes, everything he touched seemed to turn to gold.
John met 38-year-old Bruce McNall for the first time that night, and the two big men hit it off. Candy was then introduced to his idol.
He became kind of our, I guess, head spokesman. He would come to mostly all the games. He would bring celebrity friends from people like Tom Hanks and Martin Short, and really kind of spread the word. All of a sudden, the Kings became something special, and people really wanted to be part of it, and he was kind of that ringleader.
Gretzky, Candy, and Bruce McNall became a trio.
Meanwhile, in February 1989, Uncle Buck hit theaters. The reviews were mixed, but audiences fell for Candy's funny and touching performance. Assistant producer, Bill Brown.
John was so good in terms of his comedic timing, and Mac, it was the most dialogue that he would have ever had to have remembered at that stage in his career. And they were like boxers, just going back and forth. But John created this environment for the kid that was just so warm and so friendly.
Who are you?
I'm your Uncle Buck.
Do I have an uncle?
Unfortunately.
Holy smokes. He's cooking on garbage.
Uncle Buck eventually grossed $60 million. John Candy was on a roll. In the spring of 1990, 39-year-old Candy co-starred with Mariel Hemingway in the comedy Delirious. The film marked John's first role as a romantic lead.
You could tell he was nervous about it. You could tell that it wasn't his comfort zone. But I always found in John there was a sense of, there was such a deep emotionality about him.
Hemingway felt there was a lot more going on with her good-natured co-star.
You could tell he was in pain. He was a person who basically tortured himself. He was hard on himself to be better, to be, I'm sure that he was self-conscious about who he was.
Over the next year, John continued his agonizing battle with the bulge. But Candy found no magic bullet for shedding weight or for weaning himself off nicotine.
A personal decision on my part was to never intervene in his weight, in his size. I felt ultimately that was something he had to deal with.
Coming up, Candy's infatuation becomes an obsession.
I remember saying to John, I said, "Are you crazy, John?" I said, "I tried to get out of this. What are you doing?"
By 1990, John Candy was a bona fide movie star. But for the 40-year-old actor, nothing matched the excitement and drama of pro sports.
I'm trying to do as best as I can as a partner to do as much as I can for them, to be there, to do commercials, to be on the field, to do whatever I can to get more people in the stands. But it's a tough business.
After meeting L.A. Kings owner Bruce McNall in 1988, John Candy was a frequent guest of the flashy entrepreneur at NHL games. In late 1990, McNall cooked up a deal to buy the Toronto Argonauts of the Canadian Football League. He offered Candy and Kings superstar center Wayne Gretzky a piece of the action. McNall paid $5 million for a losing franchise he was convinced could be turned around. Candy kicked in $1 million. So did his famous pal, reluctantly.
John wanted to be part of this. I remember saying to John, I said, "Are you crazy, John?" I said, "I tried to get out of this. What are you doing?" And he said, "No, I really want to be part of the CFL. I love Canada."
To be a part of the Argonauts was very exciting. I jumped at that. I mean, I had no idea that my name would be brought up with that group, with Wayne and Bruce. Sure, I was eager to get involved.
While Gretzky toiled on the ice, Candy and McNall set out to turn the floundering Argonauts franchise into a championship-caliber team. John dove right in, pitching his beloved Argonauts everywhere he went. Toronto Argonaut publicist Brett Gallagher.
He knew that his element of the deal with Bruce and Wayne was that he'll be the front guy. And he'd be the guy who would be out there selling season's tickets and assisting in us in selling corporate sponsorships and drumming up business for the Argos.
Meanwhile, Candy was offered a cameo role in a controversial film by a controversial director.
I'm looking forward to working with Oliver Stone on the JFK story, the assassination, and that's quite a project. I'm flattered that they thought of me to come in there and play this sleazy lawyer.
John was excited and anxious. Assistant producer of JFK, Bill Brown.
He came on the stage to see Oliver, and it's kind of like a kid at first day at school, and he was sort of shy and a little bit nervous, and I'd never, ever seen him like that.
Candy completed the shoot in New Orleans on July 10th and caught a flight to Toronto. John attended a huge blast-off party to celebrate the Argonauts' home opener scheduled for the following afternoon. That day turned into a mega event.
Dan Aykroyd and the Blues Brothers were at our opening game. They performed at halftime, and we had 50,000 fans stayed in the stadium.
The Argonauts won, and Candy was hooked. He became a self-appointed ambassador for the CFL.
He went to every game from Vancouver, Regina, Calgary. He was on the sideline driving in these cars, waving to people. He'd go the day before to promote the games. He really took a special feeling to this.
The hard work paid off. The Argonauts were the class of the league and favored to win the Grey Cup, the CFL's version of the Super Bowl.
The whole city was abuzz with Argo football. It hadn't been like that since the early 60s.
But amid all the hoopla, John's film career was thrown for a big loss. Delirious and another picture, Only the Lonely, both opened in late summer 1991. Together, the movies generated a paltry $10 million at the box office. Delirious co-star Mariel Hemingway.
It was disappointing to all of us. This business is all about a crapshoot, and I'm sure that you know, I know he was disappointed. We all were.
John's ride aboard the Argonauts Express, however, was everything he imagined. The team finished the season with a 13-5 win-loss record. And on November 24th, 1991, Toronto beat the Calgary Stampeders to bring home the Grey Cup.
And John, he went right in the locker room, grabbed the trophy, and he was hugging all the players. And you could see the special relationship the players felt for him.
But winning cost money, and Bruce McNall spared no expense. Despite capturing the Canadian Championship, the Argonauts were buried in a financial hole $3 million deep.
The team lost tremendous amounts of dollars. It's financially a disaster, no question about it.
The team's dismal performance the following year added to the mounting debt. John's enthusiasm waned. Hollywood suddenly looked good. In early 1993, 42-year-old Candy accepted his first starring role in almost a year. The film was Cool Runnings, loosely based on the bizarre true story of the Jamaican Olympic bobsledding team. Candy played coach Irv Blitzer. Candy balanced comedy with heart in a role that also inspired some mean-spirited reporting. Cool Runnings co-star Malik Yoba.
I remember reading a review from a Canadian newspaper that said, we don't know who John Candy's going to be in this movie, either the mountain or the bobsled. No matter how successful you become, no matter how many people you make laugh, no matter how nice you are, someone's still going to find something negative to say about you.
6 months later, John was back in the owner's box at Toronto's Sky Dome. But the thrill was gone. The Argonauts suffered through an embarrassing 1993 season, finishing with 3 wins and 15 losses. Still, the worst was yet to come. Coming up, the end of the trail.
John was incredibly overweight. I mean, heavier than I've ever seen him.
By 1990, John Candy was a bona fide movie star. But for the 40-year-old actor, nothing matched the excitement and drama of pro sports.
I'm trying to do as best as I can as a partner to do as much as I can for them, to be there, to do commercials, to be on the field, to do whatever I can to get more people in the stands. But it's a tough business.
After meeting L.A. Kings owner Bruce McNall in 1988, John Candy was a frequent guest of the flashy entrepreneur at NHL games. In late 1990, McNall cooked up a deal to buy the Toronto Argonauts of the Canadian Football League. He offered Candy and Kings superstar center Wayne Gretzky a piece of the action. McNall paid $5 million for a losing franchise he was convinced could be turned around. Candy kicked in $1 million. So did his famous pal, reluctantly.
John wanted to be part of this. I remember saying to John, I said, "Are you crazy, John?" I said, "I tried to get out of this. What are you doing?" And he said, "No, I really want to be part of the CFL. I love Canada."
To be a part of the Argonauts was very exciting. I jumped at that. I mean, I had no idea that my name would be brought up with that group, with Wayne and Bruce. Sure, I was eager to get involved.
While Gretzky toiled on the ice, Candy and McNall set out to turn the floundering Argonauts franchise into a championship-caliber team. John dove right in, pitching his beloved Argonauts everywhere he went. Toronto Argonaut publicist Brett Gallagher.
He knew that his element of the deal with Bruce and Wayne was that he'll be the front guy. And he'd be the guy who would be out there selling seasons tickets and assisting in us in selling corporate sponsorships and drumming up business for the Argos.
Meanwhile, Candy was offered a cameo role in a controversial film by a controversial director.
I'm looking forward to working with Oliver Stone on the JFK story, the assassination, and that's quite a project. I'm flattered that they thought of me to come in there and play this sleazy lawyer.
John was excited and anxious. Assistant producer of JFK, Bill Brown.
He came on the stage to see Oliver, and it was was kind of like a kid at first day at school, and he was sort of shy and a little bit nervous, and I'd never, ever seen him like that.
Candy completed the shoot in New Orleans on July 10th and caught a flight to Toronto. John attended a huge blast-off party to celebrate the Argonauts' home opener scheduled for the following afternoon. That day turned into a mega event.
Dan Aykroyd and the Blues Brothers were at our opening game. They performed at halftime. We had 50,000 fans stayed in the stadium.
The Argonauts won, and Candy was hooked. He became a self-appointed ambassador for the CFL.
He went to every game from Vancouver, Regina, Calgary. He was on the sideline driving in these cars, waving to people. He'd go the day before to promote the games. He really took a special feeling to this.
The hard work paid off. The Argonauts were the class of the league and favored to win the Grey Cup, the CFL's version of the Super Bowl.
The whole city was abuzz with Argo football. It hadn't been like that since the early 60s.
But amid all the hoopla, John's film career was thrown for a big loss. Delirious and another picture, Only the Lonely, both opened in late summer 1991. Together, the movies generated a paltry $10 million at the box office. Delirious co-star Mariel Hemingway.
It was disappointing to all of us. This business is all about a crapshoot, and I'm sure that, I know he was disappointed. We all were.
John's ride aboard the Argonauts Express, however, was everything he imagined. The team finished the season with a 13-5 win-loss record. And on November 24th, 1991, Toronto beat the Calgary Stampeders to bring home the Grey Cup.
And John, he went right in the locker room, grabbed the trophy, and he was hugging all the players. And you could see the special relationship the players felt for him.
But winning cost money, and Bruce McNall spared no expense. Despite capturing the Canadian Championship, the Argonauts were buried in a financial hole $3 million deep.
The team lost tremendous amounts of dollars. It's financially a disaster, no question about it.
The team's dismal performance the following year added to the mounting debt. John's enthusiasm waned. Hollywood suddenly looked good. In early 1993, 42-year-old Candy accepted his first starring role in almost a year. The film was Cool Runnings, loosely based on the bizarre true story of the Jamaican Olympic bobsledding team. Candy played coach Irv Blitzer. Candy balanced comedy with heart in a role that also inspired some mean-spirited reporting. Cool Runnings co-star Malik Yoba.
I remember reading a review from a Canadian newspaper that said, we don't know who John Candy's going to be in this movie, either the mountain or the bobsled. No matter how successful you become, no matter how many people you make laugh, no matter how nice you are, someone's still going to find something negative to say about you.
6 months later, John was back in the owner's box at Toronto's Sky Dome. But the thrill was gone. The Argonauts suffered through an embarrassing 1993 season, finishing with 3 wins and 15 losses. Still, the worst was yet to come. Coming up, the end of the trail.
John was incredibly overweight. I mean, heavier than I've ever seen him.
By 1993, John Candy was disenchanted with the Toronto Argonauts. But his film career got a boost with Cool Runnings, a surprise hit. Still, Candy was like a runaway freight train.
He was getting terrible palpitations and anxiety attacks.
In January 1994, Candy headed for the dusty western town of Durango, Mexico, to begin work on the comedy Wagons East. John was cast as a reluctant wagon master. He teamed up with comedian Richard Lewis, who noticed a drastic change in Candy since the pair met 2 years earlier.
John was incredibly overweight. I mean, heavier than I've ever seen him. And he was smoking a lot. And he didn't seem happy.
The role required Candy to spend hours on horseback, wearing heavy leather garb. The ordeal was made worse when news reached the set that Candy's partner, Bruce McNall, secretly agreed to sell the Toronto Argonauts. Dejected, Candy convinced producers to let him take a much-needed break. In late February, John flew to Los Angeles, where he attended an LA Kings game.
He sat in the game with my wife, and Janet was saying afterwards that he really felt depressed about having to go back to Mexico, that he really was not enjoying himself. He really, quite frankly, said that he dreaded going back.
On March 3rd, 1994, John returned to Mexico, determined to make the most of a tough situation.
I knew John wasn't that happy, with the production. At least that's the take I had. And he acted his ass off.
Candy was indeed re-energized, but by the end of that day, he was also exhausted and out of sorts. John's chauffeur, Frankie Hernandez.
Somebody had told me that he had an anxiety attack. Took him home. We were there for roughly maybe an hour and a half. And he said, I'm going to take a shower. I said, okay, then I'll see you in the morning.
Shortly after midnight on March 4th, 1994, John called co-stars Robert Picardo and Richard Lewis at their hotel.
Both of us spoke to Candy, and we were both so elated that he sounded so happy because he was clearly very blue on the set.
His friends had no idea they would never hear that jovial voice again. Some 6 hours later, Frankie Hernandez was eating breakfast when he received a startling phone call.
Maybe something was wrong with John. We got to go down John's house. So we jumped on a taxi.
When Hernandez arrived at the rented house, he was given the terrible news. John Candy was dead at age 43.
I asked the doctor, how long had he been gone? He told me a couple of hours. And I asked him, what did he die of? He said, massive heart attack. And he told me, I guarantee you he didn't feel nothing.
Candy's body was flown to Los Angeles. Friends, family, and millions of fans were grief-stricken.
I felt it was like a sad ending that you saw coming, and it was not a good day, not a good day.
On March 9th, 1994, more than 200 mourners, including Bill Murray, Tom Hanks, Martin Short, and Dan Aykroyd, gathered at St. Martin Catholic Church in Brentwood, California, to pay their final respects.
He kind of had an impression of it. I mean, his dad died young, and he used to speak about, his concern that maybe he was going to inherit, some of the heart problems and that. But I don't know, who can say? It's we do not determine our time. That's up to the cosmic engineer.
Following a somber ceremony, the funeral procession started toward the Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City.
And we got onto the freeway, and Tom Hanks is in my car, and we looked around and we realized that the freeway was closed and that John, somehow there was a cop at each entrance and the entire 405 was closed. And we thought, once again, a larger-than-life act. Only John could get the 405 closed.
Wagons East was released in August 1994. The film was dedicated to John, but the disjointed story was hardly a fitting swan song. Still, John Candy is fondly remembered for his big heart and friendly smile. The ordinary guy with an extraordinary talent to make people laugh.
Well, it's a great feeling. It's a wonderful feeling to have that. It's better to have that feeling than to have an audience just sit there and scratch their head. The sound of 1,000 heads scratching, trying to figure out what you were doing up there.
I remember one night at Second City, Dave Thomas and I were working with John, and we'd all had a few drinks before the improvs, and so we went out there and we'd had a few. And John Candy picked Dave Thomas up like a barrel, and picked me up like a barrel, and had us both, one on each shoulder, and he was whirling us around like we were toys,
He'd always, every time John saw me, he'd always sing, Marty Short, how are you? And I'd say, Johnny, good to see you.